Now, good evening, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. It's Friday afternoon. It's great to see so many people logging into the last webinar for the Mental Health Awareness Week that we're hosting here at Grow. This is number 9. We're very pleased this afternoon to finish off with Julie. Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Natalie. Kia ora, everybody. And firstly, just a huge thank you to you, Natalie, and to Sean and to Grow for having me as part of Mental Health Awareness Week. I have to say that I am extremely nervous about this because this is the first time that I've actually presented online via Zoom, and I'm a bit of a technophobe. And as my 3 children continue to remind me that I was born last century, so I do struggle a little bit. So please bear with me if it doesn't go smoothly. So Natalie, what do I need to do just to bring up the front of my PowerPoint? Because I've just got you as my main person at the moment.
That's all right.
So I just go share screen again.
That's it.
Fabulous. And there we go. Can everyone see that? Is that showing up all right, Natalie?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thanks, Julie.
Lovely. All right. So just a quick little bit about me. I'm from Whangarei. Hopefully you can see the nice blue sky behind me here. We're having a beautiful day up here. I've lived in Whangarei for the last 8 years with my husband and 3 teenage boys. But I do hail from further north from a little place called Cooper's Beach, which is about 2 hours from here. I've also spent some time living in Hamilton and Tauranga, and some time working in Australia and Canada. Most of my social work career has been in the addictions and mental health field. But when we moved to Whangarei about 8 years ago, I started up my own private practice supervision business after doing some more study. So that's pretty much what I do part-time, and I transition from being a professional external supervisor to being a maid, a taxi driver, a psychologist, whatever else my children require of me in the other hours that make up the week. So just in terms of professional wellness, just a little bit of background about where this has come from. So obviously one of the really big parts of providing people with professional external supervision is looking at their well-being as practitioners. And over the years, I've supported a number of people that have struggled with fatigue and burnout as a result of the work that they've been doing. And a few years ago, one of my supervisees said to me, you know, Julie, how is it that I've been working in the field so long, and this is the first time that I've actually heard about this? You know, why are we not actually talking about the impact of the work on us? And it was at that point I thought, you know what, you're right. I mean, we just don't talk about this stuff enough. So I went away, did a bit of research, and created a workshop, which usually is about 6 hours, and I generally run it a couple of times a year here in Whangarei. It's always well attended, and the feedback is that it's really useful for people. Yeah, and they get a lot out of it. So today is like a teeny weeny little snapshot of that bigger wellness workshop. And actually, Grow has asked me to provide another workshop in November that'll be about 3.5 hours online, which will give us an opportunity to talk about this stuff in more detail. So, as a way of kicking off, just thinking, I always like to start with a couple of definitions for everybody. Oh, and why is my slideshow not operating, Natalie? Oh, there we go. So just thinking about wellness generally, the World Health Organization describes it as being a state of complete mental, physical and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. The National Wellness Institute describes it as a conscious, self-directed and evolving process of achieving full potential. So I guess that what that tells me is that wellness is not just about surviving. It's not just about getting by. It's actually about, wellness is about thriving and being really well. It's something that we have to actively pursue and we have to constantly be involved in. So professional wellness then is your wellness in your role as a professional. And I think it's really important that we consider professional wellness, because we need to be able to ensure that we're able to engage appropriately in our professional responsibilities. So the people that come and see us obviously are not coming to see us because their lives are good. You know, they're struggling with issues, and a lot of them are very vulnerable. So in order to be able to adequately support them and engage appropriately in our professional responsibilities, we need to be well first. We need to be well so that we can ensure we're able to function effectively and appropriately. And the bottom line is that we actually deserve to be well. It's the cornerstone of our quality of life. So we deserve to be well in our role as a professional and as an individual. So there's a number of factors that contribute to professional wellness. You know, the first one is your mindset about your work. So how do you feel about the work that you actually do? Do you feel positively about it? Do you kind of think, oh my goodness, I have to go to work again? So that mindset has a significant contribution to your professional wellness. The second thing is the work that you actually engage in. So, and that's going to be the main focus of today, because there is something very specific about working in the helping profession that is different to, say, if you were a mechanic or a lawyer or something. So the work that you actually do contributes to your professional wellness. The people that you work with contribute to your professional wellness. So the relationships that you have, kind of that workplace culture that you have, that contributes to your professional wellness. Your ability to navigate the ups and downs that occur in your professional life. So, I mean, we all have these ups and downs in our professional life. There's good times and there's less good times, and your ability to navigate that can contribute to your professional wellness. And then the other thing is how you manage some of those workplace challenges in politics, because there's always those in organisations too, right? And they certainly can contribute to our professional wellness. But there's also some other elements that contribute to our wellness in the helping profession specifically. So the first thing I want to highlight is this idea of compassion satisfaction. And I'm not sure how many people have heard about this concept, but basically compassion satisfaction is the pleasure that you derive from being able to do your work well. It's that feel-good stuff, you know, the good things that, you know, when you have the progress with clients or you have that good feedback, those good news stories, you know, that pleasure that you get from being able to do your work. It's also the enjoyment that we get out of helping other people. So, you know, I mean, that brings joy to us when we help others and we see them make good progress. So that contributes to this idea of compassion satisfaction. The other thing is feeling positive about your ability to contribute to the work setting or even to the greater good of society through your work with people who need care. Okay, so that contributes to this idea of satisfaction, the feel-good stuff we get out of doing the work that we do. The opposite end of the spectrum is this idea of compassion fatigue. Now, compassion fatigue is that real profound emotional and physical exhaustion. So it's, you know, that unable to refuel or regenerate after even, you know, you might have taken the weekend off work, you might have taken an extra day off work, but even when you return to the workplace, you absolutely just do not feel regenerated or refueled enough to carry on. It's a gradual erosion of empathy and hope, you know, like not being able to connect with that sense of empathy and caring for the people that come to see you, and not feeling that sense of hope that things might be able to be different for them as a result of the work that you do. Now, I say to people when they come to my professional wellness workshop, if you take absolutely nothing else away from the workshop than these next 2 points, then that is fine by me. I think for me, these are the most significant points for us to hold on to. Compassion fatigue is an occupational hazard. Okay, it's something that happens when we work in the helping profession. Okay, it's just like if you're a builder on a building site, an occupational hazard is that you hit your thumb with a hammer, or you potentially trip over on a piece of wood that's lying around. Compassion fatigue is the same in the helping profession. It is an occupational hazard, and we don't get compassion fatigue because we did anything wrong. We develop it because we care. Okay, so if nothing else, I really, really encourage you to consider those 2 points. And I love this quote by Naomi Remen, and it says, "The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet." Okay, so yeah, just really important to remember that this is just something that can happen as a result of the work that we do. So another element that potentially contributes to our professional wellness, so we've got compassion fatigue, compassion satisfaction, is this idea of trauma. And I'm just going to touch on this very briefly, but because I'm sure you're all aware of this. But essentially, we know that primary trauma is when you are directly exposed to trauma or a traumatic event, so that the event actually happens to you. So that's primary trauma. Secondary trauma can result can come about as a result of bearing witness to traumatic events through hearing it from other people. So you hear the stories, you know, people come in and they want assistance and support, and they share their stories of trauma with you, and you can develop a secondary traumatic response as a result of that. The idea of vicarious trauma is something really important for us to consider in the helping profession too, because this is when the thousands of stories that we hear transfer onto us in a way that we too are traumatised by the images and the details. So we might not remember specific stories or the specific things that people have told us, but it's a continual exposure, a cumulative exposure to traumatic stories. And what happens is that it can transform our worldview. So we can start to see things in a skewed perspective because of the information that we have received from other people. And the truth is that once you know stuff, you can't unknow it. You know, I mean, that it sits with us. So vicarious trauma is a very real struggle for people working in the helping profession too. And finally, just a note on burnout. So the question is, doesn't all of this mean that we're burnt out? Are we struggling with compassion fatigue, or we're struggling with vicarious trauma? Well, not necessarily, because burnout often has to do with stress and frustration within the workplace and kind of that reduced sense of accomplishment. So burnout often occurs as a result of the difficult, unsupportive work environments, that poor pay, heavy workloads, poor management, lack of role clarity, a clash of personal ethics with the organisational aims, unrealistic demands, those sorts of things. So burnout doesn't generally change the view of a person's world. It's not specifically trauma related. And the really interesting thing about burnout is that often it's a reflection of what's happening in the wider organisational culture, yet the focus is generally on an individual response. So instead of organisations sitting back and thinking, how is it that we have people that are experiencing burnout in our organisation, there tends to be a, Julie, you're burnt out, you sort this, or Natalie, you're burnt out, it's your responsibility to sort that out. You know, so it becomes an individualised problem, as opposed to looking at actually what's happening in the culture of the organisation that contributes to that. So that's just some sort of a really brief overview of those topics around compassion, satisfaction, compassion fatigue, trauma and burnout. And one of the things that we know in the helping profession is that a large percentage of helpers in the helping profession have experienced primary trauma at some point, which may have led them to be attracted to the field. Yeah. And the other thing is that personality types that are attracted to the field of helping are likely to be more attuned and more likely to feel empathy towards others. So this is what makes us really good at our jobs, right? Our big hearts, you know, our caring for other people. But what it does mean is that we're actually more vulnerable to experiencing things like compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma and burnout. Okay. So what might this look like? Some, you know, this idea of compassion fatigue or vicarious trauma or burnout. So this is absolutely not an exhaustive list, because seriously, I could put 20 slides up with all of the signs and symptoms. And if any of you were tuned into Dr. Bruce Errol's webinar yesterday, he was talking about the FACT model, and he talked about stress, the stress response. There are some, I think, crossover physical signs that you could put down to stress, as well as this idea of professional unwellness. So things like the insomnia, headaches, you know, the hormonal variations, increased illness, gastro symptoms, those sorts of things I think could be a stress response as well. So I think for me, what really differentiates professional unwellness from just stress is some of the behavioural and psychological signs and symptoms. So I don't want to go through all of these, but I mean, there are some that really always stand out for me. In terms of the behavioural signs and symptoms, you know, that exaggerated sense of responsibility can be a really significant sign that things are becoming unbalanced, or you may be becoming professionally unwell. You know, like, I have to save the entire world, feeling like I am responsible for the whole world and everything that happens within it. A lot of things around avoiding particular clients or avoiding particular types of work that you do, feeling really dispirited and negative, like, what is the point of doing this work? You know, that silencing response is another one, you know, actually just not creating space for people to actually talk about their issues, because it just feels like you couldn't possibly hear another story. You've just had enough. Lots of other things like profound sadness, difficulty sleeping, anger, irritability, attrition. People just leave. I mean, that's another thing that happens when people become professionally unwell. Some of the psychological signs and symptoms, you know, the emotional exhaustion, distancing yourself from, you know, those people that are important to you, depression, negative self-image, that reduced empathy, like just feeling like you haven't got any more left in the tank. Cynicism, that was always a real sign for me. It was almost like I'd already made up my mind before the person walked in the room what the issue was going to be and how they were going to, you know, engage with me. You know, it was like I'd already kind of picked it. You know, that dread, gosh, oh my goodness, do I have to see that client again? That can, you know, that can be a real sign of professional unwellness. A sense of helplessness, hypervigilance, intrusive imagery and nightmares. Another thing that happens for people, you start dreaming about clients and client scenarios. and just that whole sense of being really overwhelmed and loss of hope. So one of my classic signs and symptoms was always when if I started dreaming or daydreaming about being a florist, there was always one of my signs that things might be a little bit unbalanced. And it was just this idea of, you know, being around pretty, colourful, nice smelling things with people that actually wanted to engage in service with me. So that was always kind of my significant sign. If I started thinking about floristry, it was time to take some time out. Right, so just a couple of reflections I'd like to throw in your direction. What are your thoughts about your current role and how it contributes to your level of professional wellness? So thinking about those concepts of compassion satisfaction, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma and burnout. And I'll just give you a few seconds just to mull that over, about how your current role contributes to your level of professional wellness. And then the other question is, how might you recognise that your work is having a significant negative impact on you in your life? So thinking about those signs and symptoms that I just put up before, what might be some of your signs that potentially work is having a significant negative impact? So has anyone, just before we move on, has anyone got any thoughts about what we've discussed so far, or any feedback or any questions? No? Okie doke. It's all right.
Feel free to type them in the chat or unmute yourself if you like.
No? Okay, we will move on. Okay, so the next, the next slide that I'm going to show you is from a workbook called the Compassion Fatigue Workbook, which is a really great resource. And I'll explain how this works in a minute. Again, in the workshop that I'll be doing in November, we'll talk about this in a lot more detail. So this is just a really quick overview of it. But essentially what we're talking about is developing our own sort of wellness dosimeter, or our own wellness warning symptom. Generally, I think we're pretty in tune with what our stress signs are. You know, we kind of know when we're getting a little stressed and feeling a little pressured, but I wonder, are we as in tune with our professional unwellness signs? And I think these are really different, like we just saw before. So basically, it's about becoming increasingly aware of what our signs are. So if we're in what we call the green zone, we're well. We're full steam ahead, everything's in balance. This is probably the space where our level of compassion satisfaction is really overriding any sort of fatigue or trauma or burnout signs and symptoms. So, you know, the good stuff is right here in our lens, and we're feeling good about the work that we do. If we move a little bit up the dosimeter into this place called the orange zone, this is kind of like the beep zone, the uh-oh, something's becoming a little bit out of balance here. Something's not quite right. Maybe you're starting to see some signs or symptoms from that list before, you know, that are giving you a little bit of an indication that potentially that sense of satisfaction versus the fatigue and burnout might be coming a little bit more unbalanced. The red zone, worst case scenario, shock, electric shock, alarm. This is emergency room stuff. Things are not good. So, you know, you're experiencing some significant signs and symptoms of professional unwellness. So I guess what we need to do is start to really take some time and think about what might it look like if I was sitting in the red zone. You know, what might be the signs and symptoms that are happening or occurring for me? what might things look like for me in the orange zone? What might be some signs that things are becoming, you know, unbalanced for me? What we really want to be is always operating in this idea, on this place of the green zone, where we're full steam ahead and the good stuff, you know, that compassion satisfaction is significantly outweighing the compassion fatigue. So it's just a warning system, and like I said, we go into that a whole lot more detail in the workshop that I do in November. So obviously, if we want to stay in the green zone, which is where we all want to be in our ideal world, then the best idea is prevention, right? And we are all, I'm sure, well and truly versed in the idea of self-care. And to be fair, you know, this is the cornerstone of mitigating the impact of professional unwellness. It's really obvious that self-care is the best prevention. But unfortunately, many helpers put other people's needs first and feel guilty about focusing on themselves. So, you know, self-care gets a bit of a bad rap. It's not selfish at all. It's really about us maintaining our wellness physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. It's not, self-care is not a one-off activity. It's not just a, oh my goodness, I think I might be becoming a little bit unbalanced, I'm going to go for a 10K walk and that's it. It's self-care, good self-care is pre-planned, it's purposeful, it's regular, and it actually doesn't have to be really time consuming. It's just anything that aims to improve or restore your wellness, yeah? And obviously, I'm sure everyone here is well versed in Te Whare Tapawha, but that's the most comprehensive model, I think, for reflecting on our own self-care and what we have in place. So please, what I implore people to do is really think about what they have in their life that is preventative and is good, positive self-care. But worst case scenario, if you find yourself in the red zone or even in the upper orange zone, the couple of don'ts and a few do's. Don't blame other people. Potentially there are other people that have contributed to this. It might be stuff in the workplace or, you know, colleagues or, you know, the amount of clients and things like that. But it's not about blaming other people. Don't look for a new job straight away, I say to people, because, you know, often when we're in that place of overwhelm, it's not the best time to make really big decisions like a new job or your new Mustang or even getting a divorce. You know, maybe be a little more settled before you make those decisions. It might be that a new job is in order, but actually giving yourself space to process that is important before just having that reaction or immediate reaction. So don't work harder and longer. So yes, you might get more done, but my suspicion is that you probably won't be that effective. Don't self-medicate excessively. I've put excessively there because I'm sure everyone has some level of self-medication going on. But yeah, so don't self-medicate excessively. It's a fantastic sticking plaster, but it actually doesn't fix the issues. Don't neglect your own needs and don't deny that it's happening, because it is. And unless you take some purposeful action to address it, it is probably not going to go away. So do realise that this is normal. It can happen in the helping profession. Remember what I said before, this is an occupational hazard. So it's okay that it happens. You haven't done anything wrong. It's happened because you care. Reach out and talk to someone that you trust as soon as you can. So, you know, even preempting this stuff and having an identified support person in your workplace before you potentially get to this space is really important, so that they are your identified support person. Take a break immediately so that you can create some space and allow objectivity. And it's once you've taken that space and cleared your head and feel more objective and together, that then you can kind of make some of those decisions about the divorce or the new car or the new job. And, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all know that. Back to basics. Reclaiming wellness doesn't need to be really complex. Think about, you know, your food, your sleep, your shelter, your clothing, your warmth, all of those sorts of things are the priority. So it's important to remember that empathy is a finite resource. You can run out of empathy. As a normal psychological response, you cannot give of yourself again and again without replenishing. Yeah? So that's why this prevention in the form of self-care is so, so important. So just another couple of reflections for you. Just if you take a minute to think, what do you have in your life that contributes to your self-care? And is there a balance between the nourishing and depleting activities in your life?
Well, people reflect on that. We did get some comments in the chat. Someone said, I think it is hard to recognize when you are developing compassion fatigue until you are already in it.
Right, okay.
I think that's a valid point. We've got a question here, is how to get clinical team leaders and managers to properly support this.
Yes. Look, and that, yeah, unfortunately we haven't got enough time to kind of go into this today, but one of the things that we do talk about in the workshop is actually how do we start to have these conversations in our organisations and get organisational buy-in to supporting staff with this. It is actually, from my perspective, a health and safety issue. You know, I think we need to be talking about this in organisations, making it normalising it. Yeah, and it does. I was at a seminar a little while ago, and one of the things that the lady said was, you don't have to be a policy maker to be a change maker. And that really stuck with me, and I thought, you know, if we put enough pressure on it as workers on the organisation, things can change. So I really encourage you to have those discussions in your organisation. Yeah. But we would talk about that a bit more in the workshop. So, and then the other reflection is, what would it take for you to seriously consider the impacts of your work and make any necessary or relevant changes to ensure it's sustainable? You know, like, how bad are you prepared to let things get, I guess, is the question there. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. You know, the people that I've supported, my own experience of being in the red zone, it's not a nice place to be. So, you know, it's really important that we start to connect with that wellness dosimeter that I was talking about before, be aware of our own signs and symptoms, and when things start getting to that place of beep, beep, then that's when we take some action and go, hang on a minute, things are getting out of balance, let's not let this carry on, because otherwise we're going to end up in the red zone, and that's not pretty. Yeah. Any other questions or comments afterwards?
There's another comment. I really liked having the description of compassion satisfaction. I hadn't heard it before, and it works really well to describe how I feel about my work currently.
Oh, fabulous. It's so nice to hear that. Excellent. Okay, so I guess just, and this is not, again, not an exhaustive list, but it's important for us to think about what some of the risks are if we aren't appropriately managing our own professional wellness. Yes, there are some external things that have an impact on our professional wellness, but ultimately we are responsible for managing that. And if we don't, then we run the risk of significant detachment from the people that we work with. You know, we might have struggle with the inability to recognise that we're practising in an impaired state. We might not be doing the best that we can. We might not be, you know, fully committing to all our professional responsibilities. We can make misjudgments about things. We can make clinical errors when we're not well within ourselves. There can be role and boundary violations. You know, we do too much or we don't do enough. because we're not in that headspace to be clear about the work that we're doing. People leave. I mean, that's the ultimate, isn't it? Really, is that attrition? People leave this wonderful profession because professional wellness is not being appropriately managed, and not to mention all the impacts on our own personal lives, our relationships, health, and so much more. So, you know, there's a huge amount to lose if we don't manage our wellness. So I guess, you know, some of this stuff is a little bit doom and gloom and a little bit confronting for some people. And, you know, but I do want to kind of come to the end and say that, you know, in spite of the challenges of the helping profession, it's also a deeply rewarding experience, which is why we do it, right? I mean, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't rewarding and we didn't experience some of that compassion satisfaction. So what I encourage people to do is really reconnect with the rewards of the work. You know, what makes it worthwhile? What, you know, how come you're still in the job that you're doing? What keeps you going? Why are you doing what you're doing? And acknowledge that you're making a choice to be here, and reconnect with the good stuff. That's another huge prevention strategy. And just a final thought, in order to connect with the rewards and be the best and healthiest practitioner you can be, it's essential to manage your wellness. So remember, it's about looking after you and looking after you first. Okay? So how are we going for time? Any sort of final thoughts or questions or reflections or anything anyone wants to say?
No, I don't see anything coming through here. So perhaps we can, I'll share my screen. You can see that.
Yep.
So yeah, we've got some more, as Julie mentioned. We've got the Professional Wellness Looking After You workshop that's coming up, and you will get the link to that in the email once we email out the slides, as well as where you can find the recording. We do get some comments coming through here. Great reminder to put yourself first sometimes. It's a bit like in the aeroplane when the oxygen masks come down. They always say look after yourself first before you help people next to you. And yeah, you can't help someone if you're not doing well.
That's right.
Thank you, Julie. It has been great information from Vanessa. Someone also, a very valid point, says, we know this, but we don't always do it. It's a good reminder. That is absolutely true. Union reps are good support, someone says, Charmaine. Just now, we're also juggling the impact of pandemic and uncertain futures ahead for everyone. This is a very valid point too.
Yeah, and I think just on that, I think one of the things that a lot of people have been talking about in supervision too is, you know, during the whole COVID lockdown, we weren't only also continuing to support clients with their experience of the pandemic, we were also experiencing it ourselves. And I think I think for a lot of people that I've talked to, we really diminished that in order to prioritise supporting our clients. But in actual fact, it's kind of been like a double trauma, really, because we've heard those stories from clients and people that we work with, and we've had our own experience of it. So it's huge. It's been a huge year for the helping profession.
Yes. True. Someone asks, where would we find resources for compassion satisfaction?
So at the end of the webinar, there's a slide, and it's got some really helpful websites on it. So that's the final slide. So when Natalie sends that through to you, there's some really great stuff that you can look at online.
Fantastic. Oh, cool. Thank you, Jen. Jen just says, thank you, growers. Done some wonderful work for us during Mental Health Awareness Week.
Absolutely.
Your information is so helpful. Well, we couldn't do it without all of you guys. If nobody would tune in, then we wouldn't be able to do it. So thank you all. And thank you to all the wonderful presenters that we've had on this week.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Thank you, Natalie, for allowing me to be part of it. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and I just encourage you to take care of yourselves. You all do such amazing work, and it's really important that we care for ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Julie, for sharing this webinar with us. This was the last webinar in our Mental Health Awareness Week. We don't stop after Mental Health Awareness Week, and we hope you don't either. But thank you very much for joining us, particularly this week, just to focus some extra attention on how important it is to look after yourself and after your mental health. So thanks, everyone. Kathy.
Lovely. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Excellent.